MMA fans.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Coast-to-Coast Combat Hour, brought to you by AllAccessMMA.com. I'm your host, Matthew Hawkins, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Ed Carbajal. This week, we have the pleasure of bringing on our favorite junkie, MMA junkies, Nolan King. Nolan, how you doing? How was your holidays, and how are things going?
Yeah, they were good, man. It was December's been kind of a weird month. It's been kind of slow for me. I went on a work trip, and then I went on a regular trip, and then I came back, and then I had we had the holidays, obviously. Christmas Eve was good, kind of low key this year, nothing too exciting. And then this week I've been partaking in the Gannett company wide furlough. So I've been looking to talk some MMA in a way that isn't work related, and this is a good way to do it. So I'm happy to be back on with you guys. You guys know I love coming on here with you. So excited. Let's do it again, right?
Yeah, man. Especially it's this is like our end of the year podcast. I mean, I finally got to hang out with you again after the whole pandemic and everything. You and I got to do the Bellator event in June together, and it's just been I feel like with the whole Bellator RIZIN thing in Japan happening this weekend for the New Year's Eve, I'm finally starting to get a sense of us returning back to normal.
Yeah, for sure. I think it'll be interesting next year too. I think the UFC was kind of on that and still are, I guess, to a certain degree, of just like all those Apex shows, and I'm sure they'll never go away. I think they're going to always utilize it, but I think between Bellator and the UFC next year, like, you're going to see a pretty normal schedule. I think we're already starting to even see it with the UFC. Like, sure, there's some Apex shows sprinkled in there, but for the most part, it seems like they're even wanting to do fight nights in Vegas with the crowd. So I think that the crowd orientation is starting to be on everybody's brain. And then, like you said, the international side of it too, like the fact Bellator is going to Japan, like that's kind of the further away you get, the more likely the more it seems normal, right? Like, oh, they're going all the way across the world. So hopefully it's a sign of things to come. Hopefully I didn't jinx it and there's not some other pandemic waiting around the corner or something. But yeah, man, the more travel, the better for these events. I love seeing the crowds around the world react to seeing live fights.
It's how it's supposed to be. So
Yep.
yeah, we got a bunch of stuff to jump into. There's actually quite a bit of action over the next 72 hours or so. We did get some sad news again in the world of MMA. It seems like it's been a tough year. We lost Rumble Johnson. We lost Elias Theodoro. And then we got the news, gosh, what, Christmas Day, day before, right, day after Christmas,
Eve.
that on
Yeah.
on the 22nd of December, we lost Stephan Bonner, who obviously for probably the vast majority of the UFC fans specifically is somebody that they probably brought them into the sport. These old heads like me and Ed, who obviously were into it much prior to that, but the average fighter that we're seeing now in their prime was 12, 13, maybe 14 years old at the oldest, really, when that fight with Forrest Griffin took place at the Ultimate Fighter 1. um, I don't have a ton to say. I met the guy a couple times. Was always friendly. Met him at a Bellator meet and greet. Met him actually at Ultimate Fighter finale, just walking the concourse in Vegas, which was fitting considering that's where that's where he made his name in the world of MMA. Um, I was lucky enough to actually attend the Ultimate, or not, Fight Night 1, where he beat Sam Hoger for his first official UFC win. And then I kind of got to go full circle, and I was there when he lost his final bout in Bellator to Tito Ortiz. So I was able to kind of bookshelf, or whatever the word is, get both sides of his career from start to finish. Um, not the most talented fighter, but a guy who always brought it every single time. And I guess, I'm trying to think about how he kind of needs to be remembered. And obviously the tough psycho, uh, you know, uh, impression that he kind of gave out, and he even lived it up. The Bellator 8x10s that he signed was his face covered in blood, and he really lived it up, and he seemed to really enjoy that persona. Um, but I think a big thing, and the more I think about it, when I got into MMA in the mid '90s, one of the things that really attracted me to the sport and wanted me to get into training and do it was the fact that I saw guys like Steve Jenham, Keith Hackney, Hoist Gracie, guys that didn't look all that different from your average dude. And I think that that's a big thing for the growth of MMA, because it's one of the few sports where you don't have to be like naturally born gifted to become good at something. If you want to be NBA, you got to be tall. You got to be able to jump out the gym. If you want to be in the NFL, you got to be huge offensive lineman, or you got to be extremely quick, ripped, smaller, athletic guy. In MMA, you can kind of pick up something, especially that generation of MMA. You were able
Mhm.
to start at mid kind of life almost, as far as a sporting career life. You could pick it up in your mid 20s at that point, and by 32, 33, you just learn the skills. It's one of the few sports where you can just learn skills and really thrive at it. It doesn't have to be natural born talent. And I think a big thing that people overlook is the fact that Forrest Griffin and Stephen Bonner really just had that look. They looked like normal dudes. And the more I think about it, is if that had been Adesanya versus Pahea as a tough finale, it would have been totally different, because you wouldn't have had the average Joe like me, or the kid who was 12 going, "Oh, I can do that. That guy looks like my dad. I can go
Mhm.
do that." And maybe, that's not to discredit them, because obviously they were great athletes, and, black belts, and really thrived at what they did. But I just think that that's something that's overlooked, is how common man they were, in a sense that it allowed the sport to really thrive, because while it was a tremendous fight, visually, if you at that time, we can argue the technical skills and all the stuff that took place, and whether it was one of the greatest fights ever, but it at the time, obviously it was, and it was so important. But I think the fact that he was just kind of a normal dude, who picked up jujitsu and was just tough, and he could relate to a lot of people. If you saw him, like I have older uncles who would be like, "Oh, there was Forrest Griffin." It just looked like your uncle. It looked like your friend. So I think that that's something big that really helped with the growth of the sport. And I think it should be something about his legacy, not necessarily that he was a normal dude, but that he was a normal dude that went for it, and got to the top peak of his sport, got to fight Anderson Silva in Brazil. I mean, he never got a title fight, but it doesn't get much better than that. If you're just jumping in this sport to get to fight an all-time goat in his country, it just, so I don't know. It's sad to see him pass. Obviously I think he was having some issues as the last few years, but just somebody who should always be remembered for contributing to the start of the sport and the
Mhm.
tremendous growth of it, and really should never be forgotten. I don't know. I know we don't have statues like they do outside of NBA areas and stuff. And he obviously doesn't, he's not Anderson Silva. He's not Randy Couture, but he has his own spot where it's like, without him, without Forrest Griffin, without, the Maurice Smiths, the guys who kind of don't really look crazy, the sport would have never got where they were. So
Mhm.
it's sad to see. Obviously, let's go out to his close friends and
Mhm.
family, but that's all I want to say. I just wanted to give a little tribute to the man that entertained me for a decade and a half.
Yeah, certainly well said. Like you mentioned off the top there, tough year or somebody did. I don't know if it was Ed or you, but tough year for UFC and MMA fighters and
Mhm.
us fans that grew up. It's funny, like you kind of expected eventually you'd hit this point, but a lot of these guys, I mean, were fighting within the last handful of years. I've only been a fan for, I say only, but like a diehard fan for about 13, 14 years now. So all these guys though were guys that competed that I thought could even still be competing now. Like it's not like these are,
Yeah.
guys that were, fought in the 1970s or something. So it's been tough. I mean, it's been a lot of unfortunate circumstances. And I think for sure with Steffens, it kind of hits you a little bit, it hits you different because that guy was a pioneer, and like you said, obviously everybody's going to always remember the Forrest fight. They might look at his resume and say, wasn't the best fighter necessarily, but he did fight in his era. I mean, he was like, when you had like a premier fight and you needed somebody to fight your A-list guy, like he was A-minus list guy. Like you could just go
Mhm.
with his name recognition. You knew he was going to be competitive. You knew he could bring his kind of funky personality to the fight. It wouldn't be bland. So obviously a great career. He seemed like, despite all of his issues, even how public they were in the last few years, it seemed like generally speaking, a lot of people still had similar interactions with him to that kind of quirky guy that we saw. I don't know all the backstories or behind the scenes or whatever, but for me, it just seems like he left a great impact on the sport, and super sad, unfortunate, leaving behind his wife and his son, who we named Griffin after Forrest.
Mhm.
So it's just brutal, man. It's just, it's tough to see, especially, getting that news at 6 p.m. on Christmas Eve Eastern time is just it's a tough time for that sort of thing to come out.
Yeah, man. I mean, it's crazy you mentioned when you saw the news, because that's literally like I was at Christmas Eve. My family, we do Christmas Eve. We celebrate Christmas Eve, and late that night I'm getting home, and because of Christmas, my phone was in my pocket. I wasn't really doing anything. So of course, when I get home, I look at my phone. The first thing I see is that, and I'm just like, oh man, what a way to. I mean, technically, we're still it's not the end of the year yet, but it's like a week before the end of the year. And it's just kind of like, I mean, I guess this is a good way to segue into the next part of the podcast. There's been a lot of like highs and lows in the sport in 2022. Obviously losing someone passing away, like the people that Matt mentioned, and Stephen Bonner and stuff like that. It's sad to see when it happens, but it's also been kind of a weird. I feel like this past year in 2022, we've seen the biggest changing of the Garden MMA that we've seen, like in it, more than any other time, with all the fighters that we see take really bad L's and have to retire. I feel like the only real great highlight for the old guys was when Glover picked up his win. But other than that, it's like most of like especially if you look back at when the UFC was last in the Garden, when Frankie Edgar getting knocked out again, and just fighters realizing that it's time to hang up the glove. I feel like 2022 was a real big year for retirement in combat sports, and it kind of made me feel old, because again, if you look back at the stuff that Matt said with Bonner and that era of the UFC, you watch these guys in combat sports and you feel like you said, you feel like they're going to fight forever. You feel like you're always going to see them competing at in the top 10 for a long time. But then this is the part that, you wake up and it wakes you up to let you know, they're human beings. They're not just these figures on the screen that entertain us. They're human beings, and they have lives and stuff that can get plucked away, or they have to stop and do other things. And it's crazy to see. At this point, but it's also crazy how big the sport has gotten, and there's just so many more fans than there's ever been before. There's just so much energy coming to fights on fight nights than ever before. So with that, with the sport being as big as it is in 2022, I'm just wondering, for you guys, what fights stood out to you guys the most? What was the biggest? If you had to eat like crud on, like you had a really bad pick. I mean, just whatever jumps off at you. Nolan, why don't you go first? Like, just what's the biggest fight that when you think about 2022, you're like, man, that fight was really something, or oh boy, did I look fucking stupid cheering for this guy?
Yeah. Well, I'll say in terms of like magnitude, it's kind of funny, right? Because there's obviously fights that I think extend beyond our MMA fandom circle, and they get the most buzz, they get the most attention. But I love when it's a real hardcore fight, like the fans that watch it and they follow it, they really realize the high levelness nature of a fight. And then it also has buzz and it extends a little bit. And I have to tell you, I was doing our spinning back click show on MMA Junkie. They asked me what fight I was most excited for next year, if I was the matchmaker, whatever. I think Alex Pereira and Israel Adesanya's rivalry this year was fantastic. I thought the buildup was great. To have them both on the card at UFC 276 in July, and then to have them, have that fight finally at Madison Square Garden, and have them. I mean, I could watch those guys fight a million times. Like, I'm excited for when they do rematch, just because I think we had 4.5 really fun rounds of competitive action. I know sometimes, their grappling wasn't necessarily, it wasn't the, IBJJF out there, but it was entertaining. The whole thing was entertaining. The storyline was entertaining. The fact history repeated itself was entertaining. So that was kind of my favorite, because I felt like it was that hardcore fight that we all were looking forward to. But then also it had those other extenuating factors that got the masses interested. The whole kickboxing guy coming over and fighting his rival that he's, controversially beat. And so I thought that really knocked it out of the park for the UFC. That was kind of the big one. And then in terms of picks for me, like bad moments or whatever you want to call it, I think that, I was thinking about this earlier, and I know we're an MMA show here. We're not just UFC. I think Bellator, Johnny Eblen beating Mousasi the way he did, I was thinking it would go the other way. Like that's probably in a title fight this year. I'm not talking about like Leon upsetting Kamaru with the head kick, like those kind of rally sort of, Pereira beating Adesanya. Like I got those wrong too, but the one that I was just like totally wrong on, if you look at major promotional title fights, was Eblen upsetting Mousasi. I thought it was going to go the complete opposite way.
Yeah, you and me both.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's funny you say that fight because I was one fight late on Mousasi. I was dumb enough to think Austin Vanderford might have the wrestling ability to be able to wrestle him down. So that's probably going to go down as my worst pick of the year. You mentioned Usman and Edwards. For me, that's got to be kind of the shock moment, the kind of jump out of my seat, kind of, and especially because you were kind of being lulled to sleep during the fight. Usman was doing his thing, and then all of a sudden it was like it was one of those out of nowhere late in the fight, craziness that just makes this sport nuts. UFC coming to San Diego, my backyard, was cool again. It's been a long time for that. That had a fight, Nate Landwehr and David Onama, which was a nonstop Rock'em Sock'em Robots crazy fight. I had a bunch of people with me, and that was fun to see their reaction to that fight because a lot of them hadn't seen that chaos, like that in person. I actually had really good seats for it. It was a good priced event, so I was able to get really close to the cage. So that was awesome. And then, the main event for that was Cruz and Marlon Vera. Kind of becoming a nice fan of Marlon Vera. Kind of underrated him. Couple fights back, kind of after the Aldo fight, maybe thought, okay, maybe he's a little bit, getting into this a little bit too quick for, or maybe he's a little bit, over his shoes on this fight world, as far as being in the UFC and fighting these top guys, but he's really rallied. And now he's looking to fight Sandhagen in a main event again. And just seems to be a really good guy. The more I hear him talk about his daughter and the whole process of him, going back to his UFC, Latin America rise and, all that stuff. So those are kind of some of the highlights. And then obviously it hasn't happened yet, but just the announcement of Fedor's retirement fight in LA is enough to, buy me till February 4th with really not caring about much else.
Yeah, especially you. The thing that it's funny, Nolan, you mentioned how you yours came off of doing the show you guys do at Junkie, because the beginning of this year, Matt and I did our fighters to watch, and I was a very big. I had my pom poms out for Rene de Ritter and won championship, and I thought he was going to be a triple C and get all the belts that he wanted to get. And then, obviously, a couple of weeks ago, he just got knocked out by that Russian monster, and I was just like, "Yo!" I was just like, it's funny because like we talked about it, and I'm still on the hype train. I'm not getting off the hype train of RDR, but that fight, like I was messaging Matt when they faced off at the media day. I was like, wait a second, dude, this guy might be a little too big for him. But then they were kind of all right framing. But then when that fight happened and the way he swung for the fences, it seemed like every fight he swung at him was meant to kill him, and he didn't make it out of the first round. So I still think RDR is a guy to watch though. Over at One Championship, and that was a kind of another high point for me. Like the sport's big enough now for One Championship to make a move. They're saying they're coming here next year in Colorado, and then the stuff they're doing with Amazon Prime. So, I mean, I just feel like it's such a great time for the sport right now. It's only going to get better, and that's kind of why I'm also excited about the RIZIN Bellator thing for New Year's Eve. But before we get into that, talking about highs and lows of the year, I know everyone seems to have their own of the year like awards. Everybody, every outlet, ESPN's even got their own thing of best submission, best knockout of the year. There's been so many knockouts that I can't even think of one that I like. But for you guys, never mind award shows or whatever, just your own opinion. What's your favorite knockout? What's your favorite submission? Nolan.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to sound like a cliche answer here, but I think Leon versus Kamaru is just like that one that will always be etched in like lore. I think that will be a highlight that's played forever and ever and ever. And, it's kind of tough for me because whenever we do these awards with MMA Junkie, everybody kind of has a different idea of what it means. Like some people will be like, well, that was a rally, that was a comeback, that was a title fight, that was in the
Mhm.
spotlight. And then sometimes I'll be like looking at some pro fight from Mexico and I'll be like, but that dude jumped off the cage and threw a flying knee, you know, that's the best knockout. But I think this year, just with the way it happened, the fact that it was massive, the fact it was against the best pound for pound fighter, I did kind of break my rule of having magnitude not play a factor, and I kind of being a hypocrite. And I am going with Leon for my favorite knockout. Do you want the submission now too?
Oh yeah, please.
Now on the flip side, I'm doing the opposite with the submission. I think there was a guy, Luka Pocklet. Were you going to say that too?
That's my guy. That's the one I have. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
I mean, that was anytime you can pull something out of the bag at that level that I've never seen before, and that like you didn't even know what was going on and it happened. That to me was crazy and awesome. And I hope to see that on more end of the year lists. You know, I know again, everything's UFC centric and big fights and whatever. I'm sure Charles Oliveira versus Makachev's submission of Oliveira will, was slick. So that will get a lot of shine. But to me, pulling off something like that, where you like have me like, what the hell just happened?
Yeah.
It's impressive.
When you have black belts texting each other, like when that's happening, like, yo, what the fuck was that? How did that happen? And everybody's like literally talking about it till the next day, because I was on a Friday and Saturday morning, like after I trained Saturday mornings, we were all on the mats. Guys from other schools coming because they know I do good coverage for Bellator stuff, are coming and sitting with me on the mats. I'm like, yo, I thought, was that like a bug? That was like an inverted buggy choke. Like nobody, when no one knows what it's called or whatever. What did he call it? He gave it his own name, like Pocletine or something.
Lucatine,
like that.
Or something.
Lucatine, yeah. But stuff like that, like it's I'm that's why that's why.
Had you ever seen that before?
So like I saw him. I remember the fight. Like I actually have it saved on my phone.
Yeah,
because like I knew we were going to be talking about it. So like when you watch that fight again, it was so weird that he was wrapping his arm around Shiro's head every time he got taken down, because it's a choke that he said he did in training. We found that out after the fact. But normally you don't grab somebody like that, because you run the risk of getting the Von Flue choke or anything like that when you grab someone's head. But he kept doing it. And it's obviously because he was working for that. I saw the choke was in when I saw him grab his thigh. I was like, he's got something, and no one on screen saw it. So I'm here screaming in my apartment watching it, and I'm like, yo, he's out. And then the thing about, you can tell a great blood choke when the person getting choked still thinks they can pull off whatever they're trying to do. Shiro clearly thought he was going to still get that takedown until he went out completely. That's happened to me, so that's why I know the symptoms. So I'm like, when I saw that, I was just like, that was so amazing. And again, like I literally was showing the clips to my instructor, other black belts that have schools in the area here in Jersey, and I'm surprised that I don't. There's so much. Again, there's so many people that are doing their own awards and stuff like that. I don't feel like I saw that enough. So that's why. Not for nothing, Nolan. That's why I love that you do what you do, because ever since I've met you, what's Denzel say from Training Day? You got the magic eye. You know what I mean? And the fact that you said that one, I got that written in my notes, man.
Yeah,
that's why I love what you do, man.
Just to put some respect on his name, I got it wrong though. It was the Lucanator, not the Lucatine. I just looked it up. So
yeah. Just
don't want anybody. If anybody hits that again, it's the Lucanator.
Yeah, dope submission. But sorry, man, I didn't mean to cut you off. But,
no, not at all. Let's hear your knockout now. Let's circle around.
Oh well, let Matt go. I don't really have a knockout. I mean, if I'm gonna say one, because I'm gonna do the opposite of you. Even though I kind of still say it might have been early stoppage, but you had mentioned the whole thing with Pereira and Adesanya, because Adesanya had been winning for so long. It was, I don't want to say, there's good people that disagree with me, but whatever. He was winning the way he was winning for so long. It was kind of getting boring. So the fact that he picked up an L, I think that'll light a fire under him. They do it again, we'll probably see an even better fight. But that's, if I have to pick a striking finish, that's the one I'm going to go with, because that's the one that I probably talked about the most the whole year.
I'm sure next year you'll be super excited to have your slap fight knockout of the year. No. But
I'll slap you and knock you out.
So for me, You know, I have ones written down, but seeing a dude thrown into a moat the other day in Gen Ryujima was by Marcus Aurelio was something to behold. But I'm gonna be surprised Ed missed these. My knockout and my submission comes from the same person.
Hmm.
Somebody that has co-hosted our show before and is a guest to the show that we watched
Oh.
happen live on the show for both. Jillian DeCourcy, uh, knocking out Lindsay
Yeah.
Van Dant with a powerful right hand and then a bunch of major hammer fists, and then picking up the world atomweight title with a submission shortly thereafter. So I'm going to pick based off of just for me personally, because we were live on the show. We did a fight side chat for both of those events. She's been on the show several times. Watching her over the last couple of years as she's gotten to this point. So just the initial excitement that I know Ed and I both had watching the knockout live and then watching her win a world title, seeing her joy and celebration, and just seeing her on online and how cool of a person she seems to be, and just as a personal excitement of being able to do a podcast and get to meet somebody and watch them reach the pinnacle of their weight and their sport. For me was kind of the highlight. It's not the big UFC fight, but that was cool. Probably in-person fight, since I do make it to a lot of fights, I would say probably the Vera head kick of Cruz, just because I was right there. That kind of stands out to me, and it's a head kick. We don't see a ton of head kick knockouts. You had the Usman one, but that was it. But those are mine. I think those are mine. Jillian DeCourcy's submission for the number one contender, and then the knockout for the number one contender, and then the submission to win the world title. I'll go with those.
That's a really good one. That's a really good one. I mean, you're right. She's probably gonna break my balls when she sees this over that. But as a jiu-jitsu person, I do know she was one of the people that was like impressed with that sub too. So, well, I mean, the fact that those options, there's so many options out there. Again, because of how big the sport's gotten, it leads me to want to look ahead to New Year's Eve with the Bellator RIZIN event. Especially, I mean, the reason why I kind of wanted to bring Nolan on too, because he and I, we met covering Bellator events. I know he does a lot of Bellator events all over now, not just up in our region. So if we want to take a look at the card coming up this weekend, I was on the media thing yesterday, but last night, and I don't know if you read the piece that I wrote on him, but there's Archuleta and I don't want to say his name wrong, Suchul Kim. That fight is got more on my radar after talking to them yesterday, just because of the way, like, Archuleta, he literally, if he wants to host like a show, a version of Parts Unknown like Anthony Bourdain did, like he's like, you could tell he's in love with Japan. He was talking about staying there like until like mid-January, even after the event. I got really more hyped to see that fight, not just the McKee and Souza one and the one with the two title holders. But anyway, it seems like it's going to be a really fun event, and I think it's just, again, it's another. I don't think the timing could be better now for something like this to be shown on American television. So without further ado, let's do some picks if you're allowed to, Nolan. I hope you're allowed to.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So this is the first fight. Koji Takada versus Gadzi Rabadnazov. I know I messed that up, but
yeah, I mean, this is an interesting fight. I think Rabadnov obviously is out of Habib's, crew, aka American Kickboxing Academy. I think he's a scary guy. I think the fact that he's kind of an afterthought, in that, honestly, like, if you look at his record, the fact that he doesn't have a 0, he's like the only one in that squad that isn't like 16-0 or something. So I think maybe people overlook him when they look at Habib's team, but he's scary, man. I mean, we saw him when I was out in California. He knocked Daniel Carey silly, not necessarily like the biggest high profile name there, but it goes to show you, like, this guy's stretching people, so I'm leaning with him. I think he's a really excellent fighter. His striking's maybe a little bit further along than some of the other fighters that are in that camp. Maybe he doesn't have that sort of I guess he's still a really great wrestler, but maybe not to the Usman Nurmagomedov level. But I just think he's going to be too much. I think this is a good addition. Bellator kind of had those 4 fights announced, and then they slid this one in as the 5th one. I'd heard that Adam Borix was going to do it. I'm not sure what happened to that. I don't know if that was true or not. But anyways, Godsey ends up doing it, and I think that was a good selection by Bellator because I think that he'll win this one.
I agree. I just think he's, you come from Khabib's camp.
Yeah.
I think they added the Russian to add a little bit more international flavor to this. Put an Eastern European on the card, and I think I think he picks up the win. I think he probably dominates this fight, and it continues the Khabib coaching genius that he seems to be right now.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at these stats here, it looks like 81% of the fans that make picks on their website agree with you guys, and so do I. It's hard to pick against. It's hard to pick against anyone, like you said, that's being coached by Khabib, especially. He's got the 2 champs in both organizations now, so it's talk about being bred for the sport, man. Jesus, these guys they're taking over. I don't know what the next evolution of MMA is going to be, but this is pretty much like a high point, I think, in as far as training goes, of like what to aim for. And then this fight that I was just talking about, no surprise of who I'm going with. So I'll let you do your pick for Archuleta and Kim, Mr. Kim.
Yeah, I think this is actually, again, I'm familiar with the Japanese fighters to a certain degree. I'm not as versed in them as the Bellator fighters. I just, it's been minimal research and seeing some of the RIZIN events over the years. But I do think that this fight in particular on paper is one of the more competitive matchups that's on this card. I think, Archuleta has a lot to prove at this point in his career. He's coming off the loss to Rafael Stotts. He had another loss not too long ago. So for me, I think that this is a big fight for him. Sometimes I look at these matchups, right, even with Patricio and stuff, where I'm like, I don't know what this will mean for somebody when they go back to Bellator. Like, it seems like there's, obviously the opportunity to win. But beyond that, it seems like it's not necessarily going to get in the way of where these guys are trying to go or what they are in Bellator. I do think for Archuleta, though, he needs a win here. Like, I just feel like you need to show, hey, I'm still one of the best bantamweights in the world. At one point in time, I was, the champ. So you got to go out there. You got to make a statement. And I do think that Soo-Chul Kim is a good opponent. I think he's going to give Archuleta some problems. I do still lean with Archuleta. I think maybe by decision, but I think this is not an easy fight. And this is a risk. There's a lot of risks both sides are taking in this event, promotion versus promotion. So shout out to everyone involved, but I am going to lean with Archuleta again.
Yeah, I go with Archuleta, Southern California guy. I think that we sleep on him a little bit because, his only 3 losses in basically the last 8 years or so was Pitbull, Pettis, and Stotts. So I think that we maybe, lose track that realistically he might be like I know that stretches out over 2 weight classes, but he still could easily be top 5 in either one of those weight classes. If not, maybe even top 3. If you lose to the champ, I don't know how far necessarily down the rankings you should really drop. It doesn't say much other than maybe you're just not the number 1 guy in that division. I think he's super durable. I don't see him getting finished in this fight. And I think, as you say, Nolan, I think he does have something to prove because no matter who he lost to, he still lost 2 of his last 3. And I think he's got to come out aggressive in this fight. It seems to me the fights he loses are fights he kind of sit backs a little bit. When he puts pressure on his opponents, he tends to be able to overwhelm them throughout his career. I mean, going back to the King of the Cage stuff a long time ago. So I will go with Archuleta. I think he's a little bit underrated at this point with those losses, but I don't think he's far from. He lost a decision to Pitbull. He lost a decision to Pettis. And then he got caught by Stotts. But I do think that he's right there. Whether he's world champion material is yet to be seen, but I think he's on the precipice, and I think he still could easily, if he picks up a win here, get some momentum, that'll be 2 in a row, picks up a big fight in Bellator, I think he's right back in a chance where anything could happen in a world title fight, obviously, and I do believe he's one of the more talented Bellator fighters, pound for pound, that they have.
Yeah, and he was giving it to Stotts that first round before he got knocked out too. So, hopefully that was kind of a one-off sort of, I got caught sort of experience, because I think there was a lot of improvements he showed, and hopefully, it's tough, right? When somebody gets knocked out, it's always in the back of your mind, like, they could get caught again. But hopefully he shows, he's recovered from that, and that was just kind of a one-off in that department. I totally agree, though. People, I don't think people have given him enough credit over his career, period.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's could be said for a lot of fighters too. But let's move on to the next fight: Horiguchi versus Ogikubo. This one, just really quick. My take is, I mean, obviously I'm going to lean Horiguchi because I'm a fan. And he's already got 2 over him because of the history they shared. But there's something to be said for people having fought each other more than a few times. We saw what happened with Pacheco and Kayla Harrison. She wound up finding a way to beat her. I mean, even in the training room, if there's a guy in your gym that manhandles you for enough times, you eventually get used to it and you find a way to get to come out on top of it. So it seems like I almost, and I asked Ogikubo this last night, if he thought he was getting a sense of overconfidence from Horiguchi in this. He really wants to avenge those losses. So if anything, I think it's going to be more competitive than it's ever been before. But I still think Horiguchi pulls off a win.
Yeah, I agree with you, Ed. I think Horiguchi is still on my list. Like, it's kind of weird, right? Because I think whenever you see fighters jump promotions, I think my reads are oftentimes not great. Like, I remember like some of the Strikeforce guys that came over, I was like, oh, I think they'll be good, but then, I don't think they'll be champ. And then like some of those divisions essentially got just taken over by Strikeforce people. So it's kind of hard for me to tell. And I wonder if sometimes I what's the right word? Like I just pump people up too much. Like I kind of idealize like, oh, Horiguchi's finally in America. He's going to beat everyone. The guy, the Japanese killer that nobody's been counting. And then he comes to Bellator and he loses to Pettis. He loses to Patchy Mix, who had a great performance against him. But I still think Horiguchi, like when you look at a matchup like this, he's familiar with the guy. He's got history. He's beaten him twice. I still think he's a top, tier bantamweight. He's just happened to run into guys that were kind of peaking and are putting on some of the best performances of their careers. So yeah, I'm going to go with him as well. I think he gets it done inside the distance. I think it'll be interesting, the dynamic. I liked kind of the take that everybody had about him fighting for Team Bellator as kind of a guy that's probably more popular in Japan than anywhere else. And they were, I thought Saki Kabara was really cool in the presser he did with Coker. Just some of the answers he gave, I don't know if it was a cultural difference that we just don't usually hear stuff like that, or if it was specific to him where he's just kind of, he's a very thoughtful guy, but he was like, yeah, like, it's almost like a kind of a baseball player that used to play, in Japan coming back. Like everybody roots for him and they all, when he's in Bellator, everybody roots for him. So having him here is more of like an honor, and we still cheer for him, even though he's technically on the other team. So I think he's going to get a big pop. I think he'll feel right at home. And I think history will repeat itself here in an already lopsided trilogy.
Yeah, I think I tend to agree. I do believe that he probably has the most pressure. Horiguchi has the most pressure on him of all the fighters on this card.
Yeah.
He's only 32 years old, maybe 31, 32. But I feel like he's got a lot of bouts. He's 29-5, which is obviously, a ton of tread on the tires. I think that, I don't know. I think he has his best chance because we're back at flyweight for this fight, at least if that's accurate. As far as we know, this is 125 or whatever, 127 pound, however it works with the kilograms. I do think he wins this fight based off of his past history with his opponent, but I'm not sure where he goes. I mean, I've stayed on this show many times. He's one of my favorite pound for pound fighters. His rise outside, when he left the UFC, his rise back to the top is what really made me start to embrace the 125-pound weight class. I was kind of on the shelf with that weight class. I know even UFC, obviously Dana White was at the time too. I just Mighty Mouse kind of put me to sleep on the division. He was so dominant that I just it became hard to have the division to develop because everybody was losing to Mighty Mouse. So it was like when you thought a guy was building up, oh, well, maybe he's not as good as I thought. And then Horiguchi goes back to Japan, has this huge run, wins Grand Prix, and then he comes to Bellator, beats Caldwell twice, is, champ. So I do think he wins this fight. I think there's a ton of pressure on him. I don't know where he fits in with Bellator anymore, as far as a bantamweight, because the more I see Patchy Mix and his size and his length and all that stuff, the Pettis fight, I think he can hang. I think he fights Pettis all day long, and it's competitive. If they fight 10 times, I'd take Horiguchi's, 6 out of 10 if I'm picking that bout, but I don't think he can beat the Patchy Mixes. I don't think he can beat some of those guys. I think they're too big, athletic, and too strong, and guys that are cutting down from way too much weight. Historically, Japanese fighters don't cut a ton of weight, and he really keeps that tradition. He doesn't look like a 145-pounder who's cutting down to make bantamweight, or even a lightweight cutting down to make bantamweight. So I do think he wins. I think he wins exciting. I think he might catch him, and we get one of those where he climbs the ropes, and we get kind of that Vanderlei Silva celebration in the corner, and all that stuff going off. So I'm rooting for him. I hope he wins. I just don't know where he fits in Bellator's future if they don't have a flyweight division. But maybe a win here. Maybe that's something Coker looks at, especially if they get a relationship going, a strong relationship with RIZIN, because then you can bring over some of the smaller Japanese guys and really kind of help develop that division in both organizations.
Yeah, no, I know. I read Damon Martin spoke with Horiguchi about that, and Horiguchi said he had asked Coker to please add a 125 division. So I'm assuming he feels the same way you do. But moving ahead with the RIZIN champ versus the Bellator champ. I mean, they're both really good jiu-jitsu guys. I mean, strong MMA jiu-jitsu. I think this is more of it's going to come down to who's got the better hands, and because of that, I lean Pitbull, because obviously he's put some notable people away with that overhand right of his, or his left or right. I forget which one he likes to throw over the top to drop people, but I don't see a grappling match happening. Even though Koike he's got like that he's got that ectomorphic frame that I do kind of favor a lot of fighters to win with. I just feel like Pitbull's got the what's that saying, that about 80% of the fights going to the ground, but they all start standing. I kind of feel like that matters a lot here, so I'm leaning Pitbull too. Plus, I'm obviously Team Bellator for my picks.
I like the you using the word ectomorphic. I like that. That's the first time I've been on an MMA podcast that somebody's used that, but that's a perfect way to describe him, man. I think this is a good fight. I think he's, Matt had mentioned how he thought Horiguchi had the most to lose, or the most amount of pressure, whatever you want to call it. I think for Koike, is that how you say it? Anybody? I don't know. Koike, I think he has.
You can't ask us. We screw up names every week on this podcast.
I heard you nail it a minute ago, and I'm like, that's better than I can do. But anyways, I think he has a lot to gain here, where it's like a lot of times you see Bellator, like when Tofik beat Pitbull, the other Pitbull, Patricky, like all of a sudden it seems like Bellator is like pursuing that, like, oh, he's a guy that's good. He's shown he can hang. Let's bring him in. We could do a rematch here, like a year or two from now, it's a fight we could kind of, as long as Patricio keeps winning, you can have that fight kind of hanging out there in the background. So I think there are some opportunities for him to potentially be a sought after free agent. If you go out there and beat the Bellator GOAT, that's a great opportunity. With that being said, I definitely think Pitbull should be the favorite here. I believe he is. The most underappreciated fighter in Bellator history. It might be backfiring on me to say that so much, because I think I'm just heaping praise on him, but he's so good, man. He's just somebody that will, even if he gets his flowers and people talk about him as the Bellator GOAT, I still think there's been so much time that's been missed where people didn't appreciate him and didn't understand how good he was. And so, yeah, I'm happy to see him be able to do something like this. He seems to really want these sort of opportunities. Like, he's been posting some training videos of him practicing soccer kicks and stomps for this. Like, this seems to be very much up his alley to do something like this. And So I'm gonna go with Patricio. I think he gets it done inside the distance.
With you guys, I think he's one of the pound for pound best fighters we've ever seen in the sport. I think he is highly underrated because he is a Bellator fighter and doesn't have a UFC in front of his name.
Mhm.
I think that this fight ends up staying on the feet, and I think he boxes him up. I I'm just, I've been fortunate enough to see Pitbull fight in person 7 or 8 times now, and going back to like his debut in Bellator, and I just it's been fascinating to me to see how good he is and just how he rebounded from his losses and how he's always been able to come back and I mean he put on a clinic against Borix in his last fight. Not the most exciting fight, but when you look at his timing and you look at his ability to really pick people apart and it's fascinating to see. And he's got a great guillotine. So I mean, his strength in such a small little package. I'm just blown away by how good he is. I'd hate to see him lose this because fight fans are so fickle, and we'll all of a sudden start hearing about how he was overrated and how if he fought Volkanovski, he'd get finished in the first round, and we get all that nonsense that goes with
We go on Twitter for that. Yeah.
yeah, but that's unfortunately maybe that's not the reality, but
Mhm.
that's what's public, and people's attitudes and comments can really sway. If somebody says something, then there's 100 people who are like, oh yeah, there it is, he sucks, and that's the big downfall to it. Where on the other side, if he wins, maybe somebody goes, holy crap, maybe at some point, if he keeps winning, he's going to have to ask Coker to have the Chandler thing, where he's going to have to go. I have to have a chance to fight Volkanovski, Ortega, Holloway, whoever the heck it is at featherweight, and just show that I am who he believes he is, and honestly, who I think he is. Do I know if he beats Volkanovski? I don't know. Volkanovski is amazing as well, but any odds that are anything like more than like almost a coin flip to me is disrespect for what he's done inside the cage. So I'm going with Pitbull. I just
Mhm.
think I just think he's great.
Agreed. And this one, I mean, I guess this is the main event. The whole thing's the main event to me, but Souza and McKee, I mean, if there's probably between the three of us, I mean, well, we've all watched McKee fight a lot, but I think watching him live, Nolan, you and I've probably seen him a lot more than a lot of folks can say they have, just because of all the times he fought out here and Bellator when we were at Mohegan Sun, watching him come up when he knocked out that was it Mazada. When he knocked out Mazada, that was kind of like a fight that everyone was picking against him, and then he came and shut everyone up with the first round knockout. So he's definitely, being a second generation mixed martial artist, having his dad in his corner. I mean, this is somebody that if Hollywood's going to make a movie about an MMA fighter, they got to make it about this kid or his family or something. So, I mean, as much as I like Souza, because I've watched him grapple a lot, I don't think it's MMA. It's not a grappling match. Like Scott Coker shut down my idea of the fucking team grappling thing, being a jerk to me. And even though Sakaki Bara liked what I was putting down, though, if you watch that video, he was nodding his head. But that's another story. But yeah, I think McKee. I think he's just, if you're looking at the first of the new modern mixed martial artists, it's AJ McKee. So I'm like I said, Team Bellator all the way.
This might be the wrong way to make picks, but part of me in my head's like, is Bellator really going to sweep RIZIN? Like, is it going to be, am I being too American centric, Bellator centric on this? And for me, when I look at this fight, I think that this is the closest fight, in my brain. Like, if you were to show me that lineup and say, if you had to pick one Bellator fighter to lose their matchup, who would it be? I think I would lean here. I think Souza is one of those guys that's, like you said, he comes from the grappling background. Like, perhaps the other parts of his game are not as buttoned up as maybe some other top champions from around the world. But for me, I think, like, looking at AJ's last few fights, I haven't necessarily loved some of the stuff that I've seen. Like, I think even the Carlisle fight, like, on paper, to me, like, I think AJ's standing in Bellator, like, he should have been able to handle himself a little bit better. I don't know if maybe it's a mental thing. Maybe, it's a strategy thing. Maybe it's not necessarily his skills, because at times, especially during that come up in the last, the Pitbull, when he defeated him in some of the fights before that, he looked freaking fantastic. So maybe he'll come out and, the last couple just show that that wasn't his best performances. But, in the sake of saying something crazy here, I'm going to go with Souza. I think, like, somebody's got to lose on Bellator. And I think that this is maybe one that people are sleeping on. I think this is overall, like I said at the beginning of this is very risky for both promotions. I think that it's cool in concept, it's great for the fans, it's great for the sport, it's great to see things like this can happen. But at the same time, when you start throwing your big stars and having them go to head, somebody's going to walk away with less stock. Like, somebody's going to have, your champ's going to walk, or your top contender is going to walk away with a loss. So I'm just starting to, I don't know. There's just some feeling I have of and I'm going to lean towards Souza.
I should have went before you, because I'm kind of going the same way.
Yeah.
And a lot of it has to do with the same thing as far as, I know I talk about the fights I've gone to, but the fact I attended AJ McKee's very first and second pro fights ever. I watched his dad fight live in 2000. And I watched Souza grapple at Metamoris 5 after his MMA debut. He had a grappling bout at Metamoris with Jake Shields.
That's right.
These are literally people I've been following since the very first time they stepped on the mat for competition, outside of jiu-jitsu or some amateur stuff. Historically, the ring favors the striker, which in this fight is obviously AJ McKee. But I think you think that because of pride, and you had Crow Cop and a lot of those guys who were able to, pin guys in corners and stuff. But for every time I remember a guy getting pinned in the corner by Igor Vovchanchian, I remember another guy kind of being hanging off the ropes, and the referee's pulling the ropes away, and a guy getting dragged to the mat, and it being a fight under the ropes there. And I kind of see that possibly happening. You mentioned Spike Carlisle. Now, Spike Carlisle is kind of a different animal. Maybe not the most skilled guy, but he's like a pit bull in the cage. Yeah. And I was at that fight, and I think some of the scorecards were like 30-26. Now, maybe round by round on TV, that's how it came off. But watching that fight live, it was much closer than that. There was moments when Carlisle had McKee in some danger. And if he had been a world champion, perhaps level fighter, he may have been able to do some big time damage to McKee. So I kind of see this fight ended up in a clinch along the ropes. Maybe McKee does. You talk about motivation and stuff, and you got to kind of wonder where McKee's head was. He was undefeated. He was, I don't know if it was Sports Illustrated, but he was just about everybody's top, contender under whatever 25 years old, or however the articles came out. He was on the precipice of superstardom before really he lost the rematch to Pitbull. Had he won that rematch, I think we would, and he was 20-0 right now. I think he'd be borderline again, another guy going, okay, I fought 20 times in Bellator. Are we moving on to, I want Khabib or whoever the heck is the lightweight champion at the time in the UFC. I see Souza getting the body lock and somehow dragging him down along the ropes, and maybe catching him in a triangle, something like that, or getting a mount. And I love Japanese MMA, but quick stoppages have been something that we have seen where maybe not, Sakuraba and Shamrock. I mean, that's just one that jumps into my head, where guys kind of get hit with a flash shot and refs in there jumping, waving it off, especially. Now, keep this in mind, if this is the main event of the evening and Bellator is up 4-0, again, I hope that there's nothing like that. But, if Souza flashes him with a punch or gets him in some kind of submission, do we see what we thought he was out in the triangle or something? You never know. Yeah. But I lean with, it's hard for me to see a sweep, because these fights are good and there's such competition that it's hard for me to go 5-0. And so I'll go with Souza by kind of I know he's a champ, but to me it'll be an upset. I have no idea what the odds are for these fights. but I'll go with Souza. And if Souza wins that, I think it automatically pretty much buys you. I mean, don't you kind of got to do Souza? You got to welcome him to Bellator to get a chance at a title fight,
Mm.
which opens up another chance at kind of creating another superstar. And that's kind of what's cool about it. I mean, that was Horiguchi coming to Bellator and beating Caldwell, and
Mm-hmm.
all of a sudden it creates, so while there's a lot to be lost with a loss for some of these fighters,
Yeah.
a win by these fighters has a chance to, especially the Japanese and the RIZIN guys, because you have a chance to be on maybe CBS in 6 months.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many doors opening up for some huge eyes to see you fight
Yeah.
outside of the lunatics like me who sit around at 3 a.m. to watch these guys.
Yeah.
But I mean, I props to both of the Sakakibara and Coker for being willing to do what we know that some of the other big promoters just don't have the guts. They don't really have the need to do it. Neither do these guys, though. But just props to them for putting it on and giving
Yeah.
the fans what we've been wanting for a long, long time.
Mm-hmm. 100%. And really quick, I mean, it doesn't have to be MMA related because we're coming down to the end of the podcast here. But my question to both of you guys, just because it's the end of the year, what are you looking forward to working on the most in 2023? Again, it doesn't have to be combat sports, career, anything. I mean, if it's something personal, if Nolan, you feel like you haven't gotten enough Krispy Kreme this year, you want to get more, whatever it may be, let us have it. What are you looking forward to in 2023?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, Krispy Kreme is number one, but no, man, I hope next year. I think with the pacing of just the increased pacing of MMA, like we've had to adjust a lot with our coverage and just figuring out, how much to do, like how comprehensive to cover just the ins and outs of the sport versus longer term projects versus whatever. So I did get to do some kind of longer piece stuff this year, which is always something that if I'm very into the topic or into the interview, or I think I did, something came out, my interview came out really well, like in my conversation, like I can turn it into a story.
Mm-hmm.
Those sort of things motivate me. It's just about time, like having the time to be able to do it, mixed in with the 900 UFC events and the triple Bellator PFL UFC weekend and all that stuff. So
mm-hmm.
I kind of hope to do some more long piece stuff. I've been playing around with the concept of, like, when I did Brennan Ward earlier this year, I had the title Finding Brennan Ward.
Yeah.
I did some with John Hathaway that was similar. Like, I didn't call it Finding John Hathaway, but basically I think what we're going to end up doing next year is I'm going to do a series called Finding. So I'll be finding Fighter X, and it will be guys that have fallen off the grid. People, where did they go? Where did so-and-so, it was nice too. Cause sometimes when I've said, I'm having somebody, I have a big story coming out tomorrow of somebody we haven't heard from for a while. All the comments of people guessing gave me good ideas for the future. So I'd like to do 4 or 5 of those this year, kind of find guys that have not done interviews or have disappeared or fell off the grid and kind of catch up with them.
Yeah, I remember that you put that out around the beginning of this year, the Brennan Ward piece. So that was definitely, and I remember you did something similar for a lot of fighters. Terrence McKinney did something on.
Yeah.
And I mean, just really quick to stroke Nolan's ego before you say your thing, Matt. Like Nolan, Nolan's been on the road, making his way in this business as covering the sport. And he's, in my opinion, he's the only guy that's out there doing it correctly. He doesn't have a shtick or a character or a gimmick. He's just somebody that's out there talking to these fighters and telling their stories. And there's not enough of that out there. And that's why I've always share your stuff and read your stuff, because I mean, you're literally somebody that you're where you're at because you put in the work to be there. And I hope you get more of that in 2023 too. So whatever you want to do, man, I hope you get to do it all the way through 100% 2023.
I appreciate that, man. You've always, that's funny. Like, when I came kind of into the Bellator scene a little bit, it was definitely nice to get to kind of know the ropes and just kind of see some of you guys, what you did and things like that. So, I mean, there was one time even I was like pretty beat. I think we had done like a back-to-back or something. And I crashed on your couch in your hotel room. You were kind enough to say, hey, you don't have to drive 2 hours. You can do this. And so I appreciate you and all your support throughout the years. It's nice to see you again in June. Hopefully we'll get to do it again. I don't know when Bellator
More,
will be
yeah.
back at Mohegan. But
a few more times, and hopefully I'll be out to get out to some stuff too. I'm talking.
Yeah.
I'd like to get to that one championship event in Colorado, but we'll see how that.
Yeah, and
how
I
that
still
plays out.
have to have my illustrious first in-person meeting with Matt as well. I've been out in SoCal a couple times now. It just hasn't aligned. But maybe if they send me, I'm not sure if I'm going to be there in February, but if I don't know if you'll be there as well.
Yeah.
Oh, I'll be there. I've got good seats for that one. I'm hoping that my glorious sweater of absolute victory gets one more night of glorious victory, and we get to see Fedor head off into the sunset.
Yeah, you must have been rubbing your hands when that got dropped for LA, right?
Oh
my God, yo, he literally was blowing up my Twitter. He's like, yo, find out this for me, send me this, and I was just like, yeah. I was like, I'm already doing it because I know you want it. So yeah.
Oh, I've got a good friend flying in from Arkansas who's been to several Fedor fights with me. So it's I'm looking at the bobblehead right here. So I look forward to that. I'd like to try to get out to one, just because, as Ed's mentioned, I was lucky enough to get out to one of the Pride events when it was out here, and I kind of regret not making it to the other one just because you never know. As somebody who watches as much as I do, like, I love the UFC. As much as I might bash certain aspects of it, we all love the UFC. We love the sport. But the thing that's always made me love the sport is the other stuff, the side stuff. I know BKFC is an MMA, but I like that stuff. I like the throwing dudes into moats and the platform fighting and the the in the mountains of Russia with medieval dudes standing around and all that stuff. Like that's what I like about the sport. I've never taken it super seriously. To me, it's always been two dudes getting in a cage to beat each other up, and we're trying to find out who's the best. And I've always promoted them getting paid more. And it does nothing to do with me, but I would love to see some insurance for a lot of these guys. We mentioned Stephan Bonner's passing. If his daughter, I don't know, I don't know his personal family situation. His daughter should never have to worry about anything her whole life for what that guy did for the UFC. So I would love to see some kind of package where, I don't know if Rumble had family. I don't know any of their personal stuff. I try to stick to what I see happening in front of me as a sport. But that's what I'd like to see. I know that doesn't have anything to do with me. Maybe do some little writing. I haven't done it in a couple of years, but having doing this podcast with Ed, you guys are the pros, and you guys are who I read and who I look to for information. To help me go to these live events and fill my mind with who's fighting, if it's guys that I don't know, or even just give me dates and announce fights and help me get excited to keep getting excited over all these dang years of watching the sport. So obviously I'd love, we talk, on Twitter occasionally. I'd love to meet you in person, Nolan. It's been a couple years since me and Ed have been able to have a personal meetup.
And Nolan has the Ed Carbajal badge of beer appreciation, approval, or whatever. He's definitely knows his stuff because we had a few the last time we were together. And I really quick, I want to shout out Matt Davies, the photographer. that
he's a man.
He's the first Australian dude I've ever drank with. And literally the next day I was like, I told my drinking buddy in Brooklyn, I was like, yo, if an Australian dude says, let's go drinking, say no. Because this guy, if you remember before fight night, Nolan, when we separated for the evening, we went out, we had our drinks, we had our dinner. We did whatever we were going to do. And, you were like, we had enough. We were done. and Nolan was like, I'm going. I said, yeah, I'm going to go back to where I'm staying too. And it took an hour for me to get home back because that's how long it took me to get a ride. That fucking guy was still there drinking and like wide awake, like he zero, like full of energy. And then come fight night, I mean, we're sitting down writing and doing, our voices. He's running around climbing on shit to take pictures. I was like, yo, that Australian people are on another level. I mean, I know I talk a lot of shit about beer and knowing my stuff, but if Matt, shout out to Matt Davies Photography. That's his Instagram if you want to look for him, because that dude is a beast and he's a great photographer too.
Yeah, he's the man. He's been like a good acquisition to my seeing people that on the ground at these things. Like I ran into him briefly, like in New York City for MSG. There was an ESPN did like a media mixer thing with like an open bar, and I only talked to him for like 10 minutes, but very highly entertaining conversation as always. He's and actually when I was in Long Island, I ran into him too. We grabbed some wings together. It was fun. But yeah, he's a good dude. A lot of good people in this industry. I come into
he always
it, I
asks
sure,
me.
but
he always asks me if I'm going to be at those things too, and I was just no, it depends on because obviously it's not my full-time thing, but no, he's definitely.
And you guys must be pretty close to each other too, location.
Yeah, he's literally like 20-30 minutes from me.
Yeah,
but I like to just hang out with the dude because
I mean, big cowboy hat.
Hang out with him to eat. I don't know about drinking after that, but if you drank with him again, then you're definitely you're more of a man than I am, because that dude could literally put him away like nobody's business. But all right, man. Well, Matt, if you want to take us out.
Yeah, real quick though, before I take us out for the week, just a quick schedule for those that are MMA junkies out there and combat junkies. Tomorrow evening, obviously stuff starts to kick off. There is a Fury Pro Grappling event headlined by Chase Hooper and everybody's favorite lunatic. Other than Stephan Bonner, Clay Guida headlining that. So that's something should be fun to watch. I believe it starts around six-ish. Well, I guess 9 o'clock or so Eastern time. Then we get the RIZIN 40 main card, guys like John Dotson, Luis Gustavo, some really Johnny Case, some really fun fights for the main RIZIN 40 card. That starts at midnight Eastern, 9 o'clock Pacific. So you really could go into the combat not the combat grappling, but the pro grappling, follow that into RIZIN. We didn't mention it. The one downside to the Bellator event that we hopefully one day will solve is that there's really no live stream for it. So that will be broadcasting, I believe 8 Eastern, 5 Pacific on the 31st on Showtime. I believe if you're in Canada, there might be a way to watch it on their YouTube. I'm not sure how Bellator is shown there, but I think it might be earlier in the morning. So if you're a Canadian listener, you might have other options there. But there is a gap filler there that we didn't talk about, and it's actually a pretty damn good card. We have US versus UK Cage Warrior event headlined by Jesse JT Money, former UFC Ultimate Fighter, Jesse Taylor. And there's a 12-fight card that starts at 2 o'clock Eastern. So watch RIZIN 40. Get a little extra sleep because you're not watching the last intermission and the last 5 fights. Wake up, watch Cage Warriors. That should take you right into the Showtime broadcast of Bellator, and then everybody can pop the champagne for 2023. So there's a ton of action to be watched. And I want to thank everybody again before I sign us out who's been on the show this year. Nolan, for coming on, during the holiday season right now to talk.
Oh yeah, let us know where to follow you too, Nolan. I mean, not they should know El Rey de MMA by now, but they should know MMA Kings. But put it out there, please.
Twitter at MMA_Kings, Instagram at Nolan King MMA. And I do have a Facebook fan page, but I don't really use it that much. No OnlyFans yet.
Awesome.
Oh,
awesome.
First to sign up when you do.
Yeah.
All right. Fans can check out the show at Combat Hour on Twitter, Coast-to-Coast Combat Hour on Instagram. Follow me, Matthew Hawkins, at MMA Hawk21 on Twitter and Instagram. Follow Edit Carbazal on Twitter, Carbeerzal on Instagram, and Old Head Carb on Twitch. And again, as always, we're brought to you weekly by AllAccessMMA.com. Check out AllAccessMMA.com for our video podcast, MMA news and stories. And again, thank you everybody that's listened this year. We had a nice Spotify numbers, which makes all this fun. And even if the numbers were 0, all the people that I've had the opportunity to meet doing this podcast makes it well worth it. And I just want to thank everybody for their time coming on here and those that have taken time to listen. Late Christmas, Merry Christmas to everybody. And I hope everybody has a great New Year's and be safe this weekend.
Peace. Happy New Year.